In this video, you'll learn the essentials of working with text in CSS. We'll discuss how to align your text to the left, right, or center with the text align property, how to make your text slanted or italic with the font style property, how to use different fonts with font family, how to make text thin or thick with the font weight property, and how to configure the amount of space between lines of text with line height. So let's get started. Let's discuss how to change the alignment of your text with the text align property. We can align our text to the left, center, or to the right. And our browser aligns most of the text to the left by default. Let's create that in code. For that, I'm going to close this tab and we will start from the blank page. First, let's add some HTML content for us to style. I'll add a div element and it's going to have the CSS is great text. If you don't know, the div element is a block level element. It takes up all the width available, and divs don't have any extra styles, so they are perfect as container elements. Let's also add the class attribute, and it's going to be 1. And now we'll need 2 more divs. They will have the same text, but I'm going to change the classes to 2 and 3. I'll also add the HR elements in between divs to separate them visually. Save the file, refresh the page. There you go. 3 perfectly identical divs for us to style. Notice that in all these divs, the text is aligned to the left by default. Now let's align this text to the center and this text to the right. Let's start with this div. So I'm going to add a CSS rule. We'll use a class selector, so period 2. Then inside the declaration block, I'm going to use the text align property and the value will be center, semicolon. Save the file, refresh the page. There you go. The text is in the center now. To align this div's text to the right, I'll add another CSS rule. And it's going to use class selector 3. Inside the declaration block, it's going to be text align right. Save the file, refresh the page. Great, it's aligned to the right. So the browser aligns text and inline elements inside the element you've applied the text align property to. Now let me show you how it's going to look like with longer text. For that, let's open the page on CSS on Wikipedia, and I will copy the first paragraph from this page. And then I will paste that first paragraph inside each div. Now, because this text is quite long, we cannot see our HTML code and we need to use the scroll bar to scroll to the left until we see it. VS Code has a great feature to fix that. To enable it, go to the settings and search for the wrap keyword. We are interested in this word wrap setting. At this moment, it's turned off, but let's turn it on and see what happens. Close the settings. Now there is no horizontal scroll bar and all the text is visible. I recommend to keep the word wrap setting always turned on because it makes working with the long lines much easier. For example, if I want to remove a portion of this text, it's much easier to do with the word wrap enabled. Save the file, refresh the page. There you go. As you can see with the left alignment, the browser keeps all the lines of text aligned to the left. With the center alignment, it keeps all them centered. And with the right alignment, it keeps them all aligned to the right. Great! The text align property is easy to use and often used for text formatting and to center menu items. Now, let me show you how to make your text italic or slanted to the right with the font style property. For that, I'm going to first revert our text back to the CSS is great. We don't need the third div, so I'm going to comment it out with the HR element. For that, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command/, and then let's remove the text align properties so that we start from the blank slate. Back to the browser, close this tab, refresh the page. all normal text. Now let's make the second div's text italic. For that, I'm gonna add the font style property and it'll be italic. Save the file, refresh the page. There you go. Now the second div's text is italic. Usually, web developers use the italic font style for quotes, technical terms, references, annotations, and titles. Font style is simple, effective, and easy to use. The next property, font family, is so powerful because it allows you to change the font of your text. This is the same text, but different fonts are applied from 5 main font groups or generic font families: serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. We'll discuss what a generic font family is in a minute. Now let me show you how to use the font family property. For that, I'm gonna remove the font style property because we don't need it for now. And I'll write font family, and we'll use the Tahoma font here. So when I refresh the page, the second div's text should use the Tahoma font. And we should be able to tell the difference between how the first and the second div's text look. So save the file, back to the browser, refresh the page. There you go. These two divs are using different fonts. If you run this code and the text didn't change, this means that the Tahoma font is not available in your browser. In this case, your browser uses the default font and the text in both divs should look the same. I'm going to replicate that and change the Tahoma name to something that 100% doesn't exist on my computer. So QWERTY and random. Save the file, back to the browser, refresh the page. Now they look the same. So when you specify the font that doesn't exist on user's computer, the browser will just use the default font available. When you want to use a font that contains spaces or special characters, you need to wrap that font name in quotes. As an example, I'm going to use the Courier space new font. Save the file, back to the browser, refresh the page. This text now looks very different. We can also have a list of fonts as a value for the font family. For that, we just need to separate them with comma. So I'm going to write Tahoma, comma, space. In this case, the browser will try to apply the first font from the left, and if it's not available, then it will use the second font from the list. If the second font is not available, it will try to use the third font, or if there are no fonts in this list, the browser will just use the default font. Save the file, refresh the page. There you go. Now the font is Tahoma. But if I change Tahoma's name to some gibberish, like this, save the file, refresh the page. Now the font is Courier New. So the browser tried to apply the first font from this list. It wasn't available, and then the browser used the Courier New font. Let me change it back to Tahoma. If you want to make sure that the font you're using is most likely available in the user's web browser, you can use a what's called web safe font. To know what fonts are web safe, just Google web safe fonts and open this first link from the V3 schools. And here's the list of the best web safe fonts for HTML and CSS. These fonts are considered web safe because they are available on most computers and devices. And we've already used the Tahoma and Courier New fonts from this list. Notice that there is additional text in parentheses. This is called a generic font family. A generic font family is a group of fonts that have common features. There are 5 most widely used generic font families on the web, and they are serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. Serif fonts have small lines at the end of strokes. They are traditional and considered formal or classic. Sans serif fonts lack small lines at the end of strokes. They are modern, clean, and used for readability. Monospace fonts have equal spacing between each character. They are great for code because letters align. Cursive fonts mimic handwriting, and fantasy fonts are decorative and often used for impact. we can use a generic font family instead of a specific font name. Let's do that for all 5 font families. For that, I'm gonna need to uncomment this bit of HTML, and let's have 2 more. I'm gonna change this class to 4 and this class to 5. Next, I'll add a CSS rule that sets font family to serif for the first div. Then we'll change the font family of the second div to sans serif. Then we'll set the font family of the third div to monospace. Then we'll add another CSS rule for the div number 4, and its font family is gonna be cursive. And another CSS rule for the div number 5, and its font family is gonna be fantasy. Save the file, back to the browser, and refresh the page. There you go. Now all 5 divs are using fonts from different font families. When we specify a generic font family, like serif for example, the browser uses any font from this font family that is available in your website visitor's web browser. It's very safe to set a generic font family because the likelihood you have a font from this family is the highest. This is why if you want to set a font for your text, let's say for example, I want to set the Poetsen1 font for the text of the second column, a good practice would be to specify this font first, then to add a web-safe font, for example, Tahoma, to the list as a fallback in case the Poetsen1 is missing in the user's web browser, and then, add a generic font family like sans serif, for example, as a fallback in case the Tahoma is missing. In this case, the browser will try to use the Poetsen1 font first. If it's unavailable, it will try to apply the web-safe font, and for the tiny group of users that don't even have the Tahoma font, the browser will use any sans serif font available. Let me show you now how big tech companies configure fonts for their websites. Apple, for example, for the text on their website, sets 3 custom fonts first, then 2 web-safe fonts, and then a generic font family as a fallback. Amazon uses a custom font first, then a web-safe font, and then the sans serif generic font family. YouTube uses a custom font first, then a web-safe font, and then again the sans serif generic font family. Also notice that they all are using the sans serif generic font family as a fallback. That's because sans serif fonts are clean, modern, and have a good readability. So I would recommend using the approach Amazon and YouTube apply. 1 custom font first, then a web-safe font, and then the sans serif font family. It's simple but safe, powerful, and flexible. Most of the time, you can even skip the custom font and start with a web-safe font. And this is how you set a font of your text. Use the font family property. Specify 1 or more fonts and separate them with comma. Wrap the font name in quotes if it contains spaces or special characters. The next property that you'll use a lot is font weight. We use it to configure how thick or thin the text appears. Let's create that in code. First, I'm gonna close these 3 tabs and then go over to VS Code. For the font weight, we'll need 3 divs. So I'm gonna remove these 2. And also I'll remove these 2 CSS rules and remove these font family properties to start from the blank slate. Now let's set the font weight for the first div. We use here unitless values, where the smallest value for the thinnest text is 100 and the biggest value for the thickest text is 900. I'm gonna set 300 here and semicolon. For the second div, let's use font weight 400. And for the third div, let's use font weight 600 to make it thick. Save the file and go to our web page, refresh the page. This one is quite thick, but these 2 have the same thickness. How is that? That's because the current font doesn't support font weight values lower than 400. And so even if we set font weight to 300 here, the browser uses the nearest available font weight, which is 400. And even if I set font weight to 100 for the first div and to 900 for the third div, save the file, refresh the page, nothing changes here. So again, that happens because my current font supports only two font weights, normal 400 and bold 600. When we set the font weight values for the first and the third divs that are not supported by the current font, the browser uses the closest available supported font weight. So for us to make this text of the first div thinner, we need to use a different font. Let's do that. I'm gonna add another CSS rule. This time it'll use the div tag selector, and inside the declaration block, I'm gonna ask the browser to use any font from the sans serif generic font family. Save the file, refresh the page. There you go. The font is different now, and so do the thickness level. Notice that now the first div's text is thinner than the second div text, but still it's thinner, but not as thin as I would expect for the font weight of 100. That's because the current font supports the lowest font weight value of 300. And this text doesn't look like its font weight is 900, so I would guess that it's still 600. If we want to make our text even thicker or thinner than these values, we need to use a different font that supports 100 and 900 or the other font weight values that we would like our text to have. And this is how you use the font weight property to change how thin or thick your text is. Use values in the range from 100 to 900 in increments of 100. And also make sure that your font supports the font weight you want to set. Let me quickly show you how the text with the font weight of 100 and 900 might look like. For that, I'm gonna open a font that supports those values in Google Fonts. Let me increase the font size. So this is how thin the text with the font weight 100 is. And this is how thick the font with the font weight 900 is. Now, let's discuss how to change the line height of your text. We can make our text to become less dense vertically or more dense. The line height property sets the height of each line of text. This is crucial for readability. Let's create that in code. I'll close this tab and I will copy this text from Wikipedia about CSS. Now to test this property, we'll need only one div. So I'm going to remove these two and I will leave only one CSS rule here. And also I will remove the font weight property. Now I'll paste the text from Wikipedia here and we're ready to change the line height. So it's line height. A good practice is to use a unitless value for the line height. I'm gonna put 1 here. This number is a multiplier. The browser uses the font size of this element and multiplies by this number to calculate the line height. This is flexible and convenient. In our case, the line height of this text is gonna be 1 multiplied by its font size. So it's going to be equal to its font size. Save the file and switch the tab, refresh the page. Now this text is quite dense vertically. If I change, for example, the line height to 2, save the file, refresh the page, now the line height is noticeably bigger. And if I set it to 3, save the file, refresh the page, now the line height of this text is 3 times of its font size. A good practice for text readability is to set the line height value somewhere between 1.5 and 2, where the sweet spot is 1.6. Save the file, refresh the page. This is much better. And this is how you set the line height of your text. And these were the essentials of working with text in CSS. To align your text, use the text align property. You can align to the left, center, or right. To make your text slanted to the right or italic, use the font style property. To change the font of your text, use the font family property. The best practice is to specify your custom font first, then at least one web-safe font, and then a generic font family as a fallback. To configure how thick or thin your text is, use the font weight property and values from 100 to 900.
If this video was helpful, subscribe to get more. Now check out this next video.